Meeting called to order at 5:07 p.m.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the July 16th, 2025 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. As a courtesy to others, we ask that you please silence your cell phones or any type of noise devices. Also, I have a few reminders regarding public comments. Individuals who would like to address the board, a request to speak card must be given to the assistant clerk before the announcement of the agenda item. If you would like to speak on an item not listed on the agenda or on the consent calendar, you must do so under the public forum. Please refer to the Rent Board meeting agenda for the list of items or the agenda items list for open for public comment posted above the table located in front of the chambers. Also, this meeting is being interpreted. We ask anyone addressing the board to speak slowly and clearly for interpretation. The first item on the agenda is pledge to the flag. Please join me in pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is the roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff. Board Member Espinoza.
Here.
Board Member Height.
Here.
Vice Chair Cantor.
Here.
Chair Tipton.
Here.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor.
Here.
Deputy Director Fred Tran.
Here.
And General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, all board members and staff are present. The next item on the agenda is statement of conflict of interest. Are there any? Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Are there any changes to the agenda from staff?
No, there are no changes.
Are there any other changes to the agenda from board members?
Okay, hearing none. The next item on the agenda is public forum. Tonight we have one speaker. The speaker shall be allowed up to 4 minutes to address the board. When your name is called to address the board, stating your name and city of residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. The speaker is Mr. Cordell Hendler. Please come forward. There you go.
Thank you. So, good evening, Chair Tipton, board members. For the record, I am Cordell Hendler, and I'm a Richmond resident. So, I have 5 things to say to you today. So, number one, as far as the rent board vacancy, tentatively scheduled, there will be some appointments coming from the mayor's office. So, it will appear on either the 19th, the 26th, or September 2nd on the council agenda. So stay tuned for that. So, we try and get one more person to fill the last seat. That's one. Then number two, you are all invited to the Contra Costa Mayor's Conference on September the 4th, hosted by the city of El Cerrito, and I will get more information by next month on the location. But you still have to RSVP ahead. It's $70 per person. That includes dinner. Third is I was looking at the because I had concerns regarding like the public hearings on the regular agenda. Is I think that's not transparent because having it somewhere around on the agenda is like that's not feasible because people don't want to sit here and wait until that item is heard. Given the length of the agenda, so in the future we need to like keep the public hearings separated and take care of regular business first, then schedule special meetings just for the public hearing. So that's just food for thought in the long term. And then the last thing is I was going through the budget presentation from the last meeting, and I think paying security here like the extra amount of money, I think that would be very beneficial because he would make sure that everything runs smoothly in this room, and I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. That was the only speaker. The next item on the agenda is to approve the consent calendar.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so first motion is by Vice Chair Cantor, and the second by
Vice Chair Cantor.
Vice Chair Cantor, and second by Board Member Espinoza. I'll take a vote. Board Member Espinoza,
Yes.
Board Member Height,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cantor,
Yes.
and Chair Tipton.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item G1 under Rent Board as a whole. Item G1 is to approve the final proclamation of appreciation with minor updates to the previously approved design for former board members and direct staff to schedule a special meeting of the Rent Board on September 30th, 2025, or another date approved by the board to honor past board members. We have one speaker on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear the staff report.
All right. Good evening, Chair Tipton and members of the Rent Board. We are here to present and gain approval for a final proclamation of appreciation honoring past board members of the Richmond Rent Board. These individuals, as you know, have played a crucial role in shaping our community's housing landscape and policy around rents and evictions. The goal today is to seek your approval for a final version of the Proclamation of Appreciation and to direct staff to schedule a special meeting on September 30th, 2025. This meeting will allow us to formally recognize former board members for their invaluable contributions. There is no fiscal impact related to this item as funding was previously allocated in fiscal year 24-25. Since the Rent Board's establishment in 2017, 12 dedicated individuals have served as members. In August 2023, Board Member Jim Height proposed recognizing their service, acknowledging their role in shaping policy, mentoring staff, and navigating challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic. The board has taken several formal steps to institutionalize this recognition. A plaque and individual proclamations were approved, funding was allocated, and Resolution 2401 was adopted in early 2024 to ensure this recognition is meaningful and lasting. Former board members will be invited to a special board meeting on September 30th, 2025, or another date that is approved by the board, where former board members will receive a proclamation of appreciation. For those board members unable to attend, proclamations will be mailed to ensure every board member is recognized. So the recommended action tonight is to approve the final proclamation of appreciation and direct staff to schedule the special meeting and to invite former board members and mail those proclamations to those board members who cannot attend. And this is a meaningful step in acknowledging the service of past board members and their commitment to the community of Richmond. In terms of next steps, the goal will be to host a special meeting on September 30th, 2025, or another date chosen by the board. And again, we will reach out to all former board members and invite them. Those who cannot attend will receive their proclamations in the mail. And with that, I am available for any questions the board may have.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board?
I guess my only question would be one that I think we can figure out in the discussion period of when we would schedule that special meeting for, but I think this is good overall.
Any further questions? Seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call public speakers.
Okay, the public speaker is Mr. Cordell Hindler. Please come forward.
No.
Sorry about that.
So, good evening again, Chair Tipton, board members. For the record, I am Cordell Handler, and I am the one that was the co-sponsor of this item. So, I had been asking for this for months. So, I'm glad it finally got on the agenda. So, I looked at the certificate of appreciation. So, I think it looks wonderful. So, I'm asking the board to schedule that special meeting on September the 30th and to honor our past board members for their contributions and dedication to this program and among other things. So with that, I let the board make a motion, passes it, done.
That was the only speaker, last speaker.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the final proclamation of appreciation.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, so the first motion is by Board Member Height. Second motion is by Board Member Espinoza. I'll take a vote. Board Member Espinoza.
Sorry, could we have some discussion
Sure.
first? Is that okay, Chair?
Oh, sorry.
I'd like to make a friendly amendment to not only approve the proclamation, but to also direct staff to schedule the special meeting, invite former board members, and mail proclamations to those who cannot attend. Do you accept that amendment?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
It's very, thank you.
Do you accept that amendment as the seconder? Okay, great.
Okay. All right, so can I continue to vote now? We had a friendly amendment by Vice Chair Cantor to amendment to schedule the special meeting and to mail the proclamations, to former rent board members. Okay, so we had a motion by board member, the first motion was by board member Height, friendly amendment by Vice Chair Cantor, second by board member Espinoza. I'm taking a vote. Board member Espinoza.
Yes.
Board member Height,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cantor,
Yes.
and Chair Tipton.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. All right, the next item on the agenda is item G2, under Rent Board as a whole. Item G2 is to receive a report analyzing the results of the Bay Area Rent Stabilization Survey. There are no speakers on this item.
We found it. We will now hear the staff report.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Chair Tipton and members of the Rent Board. My name is Nicholas Traylor, Executive Director of the Richmond Rent Program. Today, I'm presenting the results of the 2024 Tenant Survey, a comprehensive analysis conducted in partnership with UC Berkeley and CSU Fullerton. This survey helps us better understand the lived experiences of tenants in Richmond and how rent stabilization policies are functioning on the ground. This survey was conducted in accordance with Richmond Municipal Code Section 11.100.060E, which supports efforts to assess the effects of rent stabilization. The study sought to understand the differences in tenant outcomes between rent-stabilized and non-stabilized units. We partnered with the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley and CSU Fullerton's Social Science Research Center. The study was made possible with funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. There is no fiscal impact related to this item. So the research team utilized a quasi-experimental design to compare tenants in stabilized and non-stabilized housing units, excluding those in subsidized or governmentally regulated units. The survey explored housing conditions, finances, COVID-19 impacts, civic engagement, and demographics. A total of 800 surveys were completed across 3 cities, including 400 from Richmond. The City of Richmond Rent Program provided a list of over 20,000 rental addresses. A stratified sample of over 16,800 households was selected, split nearly evenly between rent-stabilized and non-stabilized units. Despite some early technical mailing issues, we achieved our target response of 400 completed surveys, maintaining a 95% confidence level with a 4.85% margin of error. Of the 400 responses, 200 were from rent-stabilized tenancies, and the other 200 were from partially covered or non-stabilized tenancies. The survey's length, or the average completion length, was approximately 17 minutes, with a median completion time of about 12.8 minutes. Next slide, please. This study was approved by the Institutional Review Board at CSU Fullerton, a university committee appointed by the CSUF president to protect the rights and welfare of human subjects to participate in research activities. Participation was voluntary and was incentivized with $10 gift cards. While technical challenges affected the first Richmond mailing, they were addressed with follow-up postcards. The bilingual outreach ensured accessibility for both English and Spanish speakers. So in terms of survey findings, the first was that there was a significant awareness of the rent control ordinance in Richmond. The survey found that awareness of Richmond's rent ordinance is high, with 82% of respondents knowing about the city's policy. About 60% also knew about the rent program. However, awareness was slightly lower among younger tenants and tenants identifying as Blacks or Latinx, highlighting a need for more targeted outreach to those groups. Tenants learned about the program mainly through city communications, community events, our website, and housing providers. So as you know, when a landlord needs to raise the rent, they're required to give us a copy of the rent increase, and they have to provide a copy of the rent program brochure along with the rent increase notice. So many of them learn about us through that process. In terms of the impacts, the first was that many tenants reported that rent control offered them a sense of stability and predictability. The annual general adjustment mechanism was generally well understood and appreciated. Long-term tenants, particularly those on fixed incomes, credited the policy with helping them remain housed despite market pressures. There were some challenges that were identified as a result of the survey. While the survey certainly indicates that rent control supports affordability, tenants did express concerns that that the law may be discouraging landlords from investing in property maintenance. Some tenants feared retaliation for requesting repairs, and that there were many tenants that responded with statements that their landlords had advised them that they're not going to make repairs because they were regulated, or that if they wanted repairs that they would have to pay for those repairs, which of course is not actually allowed. All right, next slide, please. So in terms of the comparative analysis, rent-stabilized tenants were generally younger. They were more likely to be immigrants and more likely to live in smaller units. While they paid lower rent on average, they did report higher levels of financial stress. They also expressed more concern about eviction and reported more housing issues than their non-stabilized peers. They also had less financial flexibility and fewer savings. These insights reinforce the protective impact of stabilization, of housing stabilization, but also show the need for expanded financial and rental housing support. So in terms of the key takeaways of the survey validates that rent stabilization is achieving many of its intended outcomes, namely housing stability, community stability, recourse for addressing housing quality issues, and a strong tenant awareness of their rights and protections. Next slide. However, the survey also indicates that challenges do persist, particularly around enforcement of habitability standards and addressing tenant fears of retaliation, and how the power dynamics in landlord-tenant relationships are impacting tenants' willingness to assert their rights. Their survey points to a need to refocus outreach and education, particularly around providing additional support services, such as continuing to develop rent program services that help landlords and tenants resolve conflicts and bridge the psychological gap associated with the landlord-tenant power dynamic. Refocus efforts to inform tenants and landlords how to leverage their right to file rent adjustment petitions, how to assert their rights that prohibit retaliation. It also shows a need to address housing insecurity, and that could be achieved by collaborating more closely with the Community Development Department to improve the rental inspection program, as well as provide additional services such as rent relief services for those tenants who are getting behind on the rent. The survey findings will certainly help staff and the board develop policies and services that are aligned with the goals of the rent ordinance. Next slide. So the recommended action tonight is to receive the report analyzing the results of the Bay Area Rent Stabilization Survey. And with that, myself and Fred are available for any questions that the board may have. And thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board? Board Member Height.
When I look at this, I realize almost everything that we see here we've realized. And does this just give you more impetus to do what we're doing? Or, I mean, because we've realized all this, right? Pretty much.
I agree with you. I do think that we can and will be refocusing our efforts to better collaborate with the city of Richmond. This will be through our collaboration, our cooperation agreement with the city. This will allow us to help bring more policies to the city council for adoption, that policies that align with the purpose of the rent ordinance, which is to regulate rents and evictions so that it helps promote housing stability and community stability. So yes, we are doing a lot of what the survey indicates needs to be done to fulfill the goals of the rent ordinance. But I think the survey does assist us in honing in on what areas of outreach we may need to double down on and focus more on, particularly around outreach to younger folks, African Americans, Latinx community members, immigrant community members, and just generally a need to address ongoing, probably one of the biggest takeaways for me is helping tenants learn how to assert their rights in the face of the kind of inherent imbalance in the landlord-tenant relationship, the power relationship, and doing so in a way that's productive, that allows a tenant to feel safe, that they have a safe venue to work out their disputes with their owner, with the landlord. So, yes.
Well, that, pretty much addresses everything, but only 6% of were Spanish speakers that responded to, so that's worrisome.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is all about. It could be, I have no idea. That is a good question. That's something I am wondering about as well.
Creo que lo que más me desanima es ver que la mayor parte de las personas que respondieron a esta encuesta fueron anglosajones y el solo 6% fueron personas que hablan español.
I think that's what really worries me the most is that the most Spanish-speaking ones that did not fulfill this were 6% of the Spanish-speaking.
Sabiendo que tenemos una ciudad con la mayoría de personas de otras comunidades que no solo son de habla inglés.
Yes, and knowing that the majority of the occupants that we have here in Richmond are actually the majority that non-speaking English.
Disculpe. Y estoy de acuerdo con que la divulgación y el alcance de la comunidad, como siempre, es una prioridad, porque si vemos que solamente las personas que hablan inglés todavía tienen preguntas, entonces estamos viendo que la demás comunidad todavía está en mayor desconocimiento de lo que es control de renta.
I think that it actually shows more if the majority, even English speaking, have a lot of questions. Now, can you imagine the ones that didn't speak English, they have a lot even more.
Como siempre, les sugiero que busquemos alternativas para poder llegar a ese tipo de comunidades.
As always, I concur that we need to focus on other ways that we can reach out to the public community to be able to enhance a little more information on this.
Y la otra, estoy de acuerdo en que debemos de abogar por mejores pólizas para buscar que los residentes se sigan manteniendo en la ciudad.
And I agree that we need to continue with the policies so that we maintain the majority of people in the house as well.
Una pregunta más. Disculpen. Sí. ¿Qué hicieron para realmente llegar a más gente que no solamente hablaran inglés?
What did you actually do to lay this out to other non-speaking people out in the community? Non-English speaking, excuse me.
So all of the tenants who received a postcard, they received a postcard that was both in Spanish and in English. So we don't necessarily know whether or not we're mailing, a postcard to a Spanish-speaking family or not. But the postcard was bilingual. So if the household was Spanish-speaking, they could respond in Spanish if they wanted to. I do have, this is not really your question per se, but one of the questions I'm wondering about is whether or not there were concerns in the Spanish-speaking community about sending their information into a governmental institution, especially if they were monolingual Spanish speakers and were undocumented. Because that is certainly a concern that we see on a regular basis in our office. So that may be one of the reasons why there was a lower turnout, but that's just speculation on my part. But yes, all I can say is that each household had an opportunity to respond in Spanish or English, whatever language they preferred. But I'm not sure why we had such a low response in Spanish. I don't know why.
Tal vez se puso, también esa encuesta se podía tomar en otro idioma que no solo fuera inglés y español.
It was in both English and Spanish.
No, no pregunté eso.
No?
Pregunté que si esta encuesta se podía tomar en otro idioma que no solo fuera inglés y español.
Oh, I see.
That the actual survey, was in another language, not only English or Spanish. Is it available?
The survey company I believe they did have an option for if there was another language for that person to contact the company and do their survey in that other language.
Ok, gracias.
I had comment and a question. So first, just commenting, I'm grateful to, as as board member Height mentioned, a lot of the conclusions of this and the data that we're seeing are things that we already knew anecdotally, and having some numbers to back it up, I think, will be helpful if the impact of rent control and rent stabilization and whether it is a good thing for our community gets called into question. It's good to have these numbers and results here. Also, just wanting to point out that some things about how many tenants in rent stabilized units are concerned about evictions, and we know about the way that most of us are one eviction away from being unhoused, and that is an issue that many residents in the city are upset about having unhoused neighbors, and so just noting that the rent program is a really important part of the ecosystem of keeping people in their homes, giving people the opportunity to stay in the homes that they have lived in. Also noticing that the majority of that tenants in rent-controlled units tend to be more likely to be immigrants, and that at this time where the safety of immigrants is challenged by the federal administration, and I know is a big concern to the majority of Richmonders, wanting to make sure that our immigrant neighbors are safe, that allowing folks to stay safely in their homes is another really important part. So just wanted to make those comments, really grateful for the program. Obviously, wouldn't be on the board if I wasn't. And then my question is, now that, so my understanding is that the cooperation agreement between the program and the city has been finalized, and so this report mentions in the conclusions that, continuing to develop closer collaboration with the city, and in particular on the rental inspection program. And so I'm wondering if you could give a quick update of kind of where we are in those goals as they relate to improving, especially hearing about the ways that people who are in rent stabilized units are hearing from their landlords that the rent stabilization makes them unable to do repairs, that people have greater concern about bringing up repairs to their landlord because of rent stabilization, and like just wanting to make sure that we're doing our part to address those that behavior on the part of landlords, and to make sure that residents are not having to illegally pay out of pocket for repairs that should be covered by the landlord. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. So to your first question, the cooperation agreement was executed last week, so all the signatures were done, and that sets a 6-month timeline for us to bring forth the several city ordinances, one of them being, which you will see today, the buyout policy. The others will include the rental inspection program or rental inspection ordinance and revisions thereto. In particular, the rental inspection program is being revised, has been revised, but is continuing to be revised by the city to require that all units are inspected each year, that there's no longer kind of a self-certification that the landlord can do, and that there would be some form of plan that would be required, that would be where the rent board and rent program in the city would work together to try to make sure that tenants were, their concerns were addressed in situations where displacement occurred. So if the landlord needs to do significant repairs on a property and the tenant is going to be displaced, one of the proposed revisions would be to require a displacement or tenant habitability plan to be developed prior to the work starting, to make sure that the tenant gets relocation payments, rent reduction if necessary, and hours of work are well defined, so on and so forth. So we are going to be working with the Community Development Department on that ordinance. But that's one of us. There's 4 ordinances: the buyout lien ordinance, real estate disclosure ordinance, and the rental inspection ordinance that we're going to be working closely with the city on. So in any case, so that's the first thing. The second part of your question has to do, could you repeat the last part of your question?
I think I was just giving a little bit more context into why I was asking about the rental inspection program. So it wasn't so much a second question as just noticing that based on the responses to this survey, there seems to be some inappropriate claims made by landlords that the tenants are responsible for the cost of repairs, and also noting that tenants expressed fear about raising the need for repairs to their landlords, which I know that the landlords who, the majority of whom are complying with the law and would not make the tenants pay for that, and I assume would want to know about repairs sooner rather than later. So for me, addressing those, having a strong rental inspection program is an important part of addressing those concerns. So I was just naming
Yes.
that additional context.
Okay.
But thank you for your answer. I appreciate
Sure.
that, and I
No
look
worries.
forward to hearing how that progresses.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering generally, and this might be a premature question, but what the sort of what the next steps or what the upshot is of these results. I found the survey really fascinating. I hadn't known this was in the works, so I really appreciated it. But yeah, if you could speak just generally about sort of what might be done with the results. I'd appreciate that.
Yes. So one thing it's going to certainly inform our outreach ideas and outreach plans, who we're going to be focusing our outreach efforts towards. It'll also inform the way that we educate landlords and tenants. I've been thinking about how helpful it would be to have more workshops and educational or education around how to bring if you're a tenant, how to bring issues of repairs to the landlord, how to resolve conflicts around repairs through the rent program and also through their self-help methods. So I think it's going to inform our ability to perform outreach and education and make it so that when we do our outreach and education, we have a kind of understanding and background of what the needs are in the community. So that's one thing. I also think that it could inform some of our budget decisions in the future if we decide to take up certain outreach activities that cost a certain amount of money, so it may inform budget decisions. And it also, I think, back to Vice Chair Cantor's comment about the rental inspection program, I think it is going to help us when we work with the Community Development Department to revise the programs to address certain deficiencies in the current program and current law. One example I'll give you is that when a rental inspection is done, the inspector will check off whether they think an issue is the responsibility of the landlord or the issue is the responsibility of the tenant. And that may not necessarily be an appropriate thing to have on the rental inspection checklist. And that's something we're going to bring up with the Community Development Department and suggest that a different approach be used. Because oftentimes you don't know, the landlord can say, oh, the tenant caused this problem, and so the inspector might just check it off. Or the actual issue may be much more nuanced, and having an official from the city maybe indicate who's at fault over a housing issue can result in conflicts. And so that's one example of a way that we can improve the program that reflects some of the findings that we found. So.
I apologize for not remembering the answer to this offhand, but does the rent program or do rent program resources, some of the counseling and mediation, education, did those apply to landlords and tenants of non-rent stabilized units as well? I mean, obviously the rent program specific policies wouldn't apply, but
Well, so there's two, as you know, there's two components to the rent ordinance. There's rent regulation, and then there's eviction protections or regulation around evictions. So almost all units in Richmond, the vast majority of units in Richmond have just cause eviction protections, even if they don't have rent stabilization.
that makes sense.
So, yeah.
That makes sense, because
Yeah.
one of what's on my mind when I ask that is that one of the things that interested me about the results was that there were places where I would have expected to see big disparities between rent stabilized unit responses and non-stabilized responses, and didn't. And one of those was, certainly there is this stereotype that when you have rent control, it disincentivizes the landlord from making repairs. And I was actually really surprised to see that that reality probably, and those fears as well, that perception was really true, just sort of inherently as part of the tenant experience, and was not limited or really even significantly stronger, at least among responses. We're not quantifying objective reality here necessarily, but there wasn't a really strong disparity. So anyway, I found the results really fascinating. I'm glad to hear that there is a plan for how to act on them.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, in the monthly activity report, it looks like counseling in Spanish went up quite a bit since last year. So it looks like there's been a big increase in the outreach. I think has been working to some degree, if you look at the activity reports. And I've been inspected twice by the city for this rent thing, and both times it was really cursory. Both times there's 4 units in my building. They should have, why would they go to me twice? And I think the reason why is because the whole thing was manipulated by the property managers. And I think this is a big problem. A landlord isn't necessarily going to know what a property manager is going to do. And I think that a lot of these property managers are just dodging things and are manipulating. I think a lot of this is on the property managers. I just wonder about this. I think there's some bad actors out there.
I agree with you.
That's it.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions from the board? Seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers, if any.
No speakers on this item.
In that case, is there a motion?
So they received this, so do they have to take a, no, they just received it? So no motion needed because you received it,
Okay.
okay? All right, the next item on the agenda is item G3. Under Rent Board as a whole, item G3 is to receive a previously approved tenant buyout agreement policy, approve or modify the board's previously adopted policy of the high level of oversight, policy option 3, and direct staff to, 1, present the Rent Board's policy during a study session at a meeting of the Richmond City Council, and 2, work with the City Attorney's Office to draft a buyout agreement ordinance. There are no speakers on this item.
Thank you, and we will now hear the staff report.
Thank you. Again, good evening, Chair Tipton and members of the Rent Board. I'm here to present the updated tenant buyout agreement policy for your review and consideration. This presentation outlines the background, purpose, key components, and policy options for regulating buyout agreements and seeks your direction on next steps. So in terms of the statement of the issue, the Rent Board began discussing buyout regulations in 2018 and selected a high oversight policy. However, implementation was delayed by the pandemic and ongoing cost pool negotiations. With the new 2025 cooperation agreement in place, we now have the authority to move forward and need the board's input on whether to affirm or revise the original policy. And there is no fiscal impact related to this item. So let's start off with the basics. what is a buyout agreement? A buyout agreement occurs when a landlord offers a payment in exchange for a tenant voluntarily vacating their unit. While legal, these agreements often raise concerns in cities with rent stabilization, especially when tenants are not fully informed of their rights or feel pressured to accept unfavorable terms. Now, not regulating buyout agreements can lead to tenant displacement and loss of affordable housing as well. Next slide. So why regulate buyout agreements? So cities adopt buyout policies to ensure tenants are protected. These policies aim to prevent coercion, to ensure tenants understand their rights, and to stop landlords from trying to circumvent rent control or eviction protections. Regulations also help track the effects of these agreements on housing affordability and housing stability. So regardless of which oversight level is selected, the policies presented to the board include basic tenant protections. These policies ensure language accessibility, broad property coverage, so applying to all just cause properties, protection from harassment, so there would be a requirement to have anti-harassment language in any buyout agreement, and the right to rescind agreements if the rules are violated. So 3 policy options were developed based on oversight level. Option 1 involves basic notice and rescission rights. Option 2 adds stronger requirements, including minimum payouts and limited penalties. Option 3, which was the policy approved by the board back in 2018, adds full transparency and accountability mechanisms, including the requirement to include all buyout agreements in a public database, higher penalties, and a requirement to contact the tenant when there is a buyout agreement submitted. And as shown in attachments 1 and 2 of the agenda report, staff conducted extensive outreach, both in 2018 and again this year, analyzing tenant buyout policies from multiple jurisdictions to support the board in making a well-informed policy decision. So let's do a quick overview of option 3, or the high oversight option that was approved by the previous board. Option 3 offers the most comprehensive tenant protections. It mandates a longer rescission period, so instead of 30 days, it's 45 days. Higher minimum payouts, so it requires the minimum payout to be the relocation amount for doing a withdrawal from the rental market. It requires proactive involvement by the rent program, and that means that when the agreements are filed with the rent program will contact the tenant and include the agreement in a public database. Also, the option 3 includes civil penalties of up to $1,000 per violation, as well as a private right of action. And the goal of this option is to deter abuse and strengthen enforcement. So here's some final thoughts on buyout regulations in option 3. So implementing a strong tenant buyout ordinance aligns with the rent program's mission of ensuring fair and stable housing in Richmond. And in 2018, the Rent Board approved option 3 as it offers the highest level of protection and accountability and allows us to meaningfully address the growing challenges of tenant displacement and erosion of affordable housing. So staff recommends the board consider affirming option 3, which the board approved in 2018. This option offers robust protections for Richmond tenants, and we propose presenting this policy to the City Council in September, and we would be doing a study session at the City Council. And if the city approves the policy, they would direct the City Attorney's Office to work with our legal counsel to draft the ordinance for possible adoption in the fall. Now, the board may choose to modify the previous board's option 3 if they wish. So just, I'm going to read out the recommended action, which is to receive the previously approved tenant buyout agreement policy, approve or modify the board's previously adopted policy of high level of oversight, policy option 3, and direct staff to present the rent board's policy during a study session at a meeting of the City of Richmond City Council, and to work with the City Attorney's Office to draft a buyout agreement ordinance. And with that, we're here to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board?
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious, the relocation amount for market withdrawal, can you talk a little bit more about how that amount would be calculated?
Sure. Actually, can you pull up our website? We're going to pull up our website so we can go directly to that section
Thank you.
of the law. Hopefully this connects to the internet. If it doesn't, I can
Perhaps
quickly-
Microsoft Edge might work if Google Chrome doesn't.
Yeah, try up above. Yeah, some of that might work. Yep. All right, well, I'm going to read out what I have then. Okay. Okay, so would it be under evictions? I believe so. There we go. So I don't know if I can get the exact amounts in front of me, but I will try to pull it up right now. Let's see. If staff can look at it, try to search for this while I'm searching, that'd be great. There we go. That might be it. Let's see here. Okay, yes. All right, so under the relocation ordinance, if a landlord withdraws from the rental market, which is another way of saying that they're conducting an Ellis Act eviction, which is going out of the rental business in California, under our relocation ordinance, for withdrawal from the rental market, if the tenant is being displaced from a 2-bedroom apartment, the base amount that the landlord would have to pay would be $18,255.22. And if it's a qualified household, which is a household where the tenant is senior, disabled, or has minor children in the unit, then the amount is $21,009.41. The amount is less for a 1-bedroom. It's $13,451, and qualified household in a 1-bedroom is $15,501 and some change, and a studio is $8,775.23. Thank you. Perfect. And great. And the qualified household is $10,056.28. So those would be the minimum payout amounts that a landlord would be required to make if they were buying out a tenant in one of these types of rental units.
Great.
So-
Under policy option 3.
So just so I'm understanding, this shift this new policy would shift those amounts to not just apply for like owner-occupied move-ins or Ellis Act move-ins, but it would be then applied to any time there is a relocation agreement for whatever reason.
If it's a agreement for the tenant to voluntarily vacate
Yes.
for a sum of money, then yes, without a buyout ordinance, an owner can say to a tenant, "I'll give you $5,000." And if the tenant doesn't know, they'll take it. Oh, that seems like a good deal.
Yeah.
They may take it and then afterwards regret having, taken that $5,000 when they might otherwise receive something else if there had been a withdrawal from the rental market or an owner move-in.
Okay, great. And I'm noticing that the owner move-in has a lower amount of payment. Would this, for owner move-in evictions, would this new policy, what amounts would apply? Would it still have the carve-out for owner move-ins to pay the lower amount listed on this page?
Yeah, so if an owner does an owner move-in eviction or terminates the tenancy for owner move-in, they're going to be required to pay the amount required under the relocation ordinance, the $9,159.42 or whatever the amount is. That doesn't change. And if a landlord wants to evict tenants to do an Ellis Act eviction or withdraw from the rental market, these amounts do not change. The only thing that this buyout policy does is it requires that the tenant be offered at a minimum the amount that they would otherwise qualify for if they were to be evicted for a withdrawal from the rental market. But Charles may need to clarify something.
No, I just want to give a little bit more context. It might just be helpful in this instance. So this is a buyout policy that will eventually lead to an ordinance, and the ordinance would be regulating circumstances where a tenant and a landlord want to negotiate for the tenant leaving. So this is not an eviction. The numbers you see before you, these numbers are tied to specific evictions. I give you a notice of termination. Now you have to pay me some amount of money. It's here. This ordinance that we're discussing is not that. This is a tenant and a landlord talking about moving out because the tenant has a right to be there. Maybe, I don't know, the landlord wants the property back for whatever reason, but they do not want to go through an eviction. They can agree. And the policy, the specific item you're discussing, is to set a minimum amount of money. And that minimum amount of money will be tied, or one option is to tie it to the withdrawal amounts of $18,000. And that's just the floor. You can negotiate for higher than that, but at the very least, it has to be $18,000. And the reason it doesn't matter, you can want the place back for X, Y, Z, doesn't matter. If you're going to do the cash for keys is what people call it. If you're going to buy your tenant out, that's just the minimum. It's also important just procedurally to understand that after you all discuss what you're going to discuss and vote how you're going to vote, that we are going to go before City Council, and City Council might have a different idea from you all. They might have different questions, and they might have just different constituents generally. And it's a city ordinance, it's not a rent board ordinance. And so if the city differs from what you all say here, we might have to bring it back here and talk to you about what the city's version is going to be until we have something that makes sense. So this might be going back and forth for a while. Finally, it's really good that you're asking all these questions. I encourage you to 100% ask these questions and even ask more, because I suspect the city is going to have a lot of questions. And if they're not asked here, they're just going to be asked there, and it might just cause more time. Some of this stuff I know, maybe because you all have sat on the board before and you're familiar generally with tenant law, tenancy law, it might be maybe makes a little bit more sense to you all, but at the city council level, they don't really deal with this. at that level, so we might give a presentation that's going to be far more detailed. One last thing you want to I mean, there's a lot of things in here that were just general, but you might want to try to tease out some of those things. You know, the rescission part that, you know, it gives you a 20-day minimum, 30-day minimum, 45-day minimum. Just so you all know, the rescission, I don't want to, because I just do the law, I don't want to explain the policy. That's going to have to be Mr. Trailer. But just for your general edification, when a landlord wants to buy a tenant out, how it generally works is that they have to provide a tenant first with a form. The form is developed by the rent program. The form has all of these rights. You know, it's in various languages. The tenant receives the form. The tenant has to sign the form, give it back to the landlord, then the landlord files it with the program so that the program knows that the tenant had the form. The form informs the tenant of all his rights. Now, the contract, the landlord is free to draft their own contract. It's going to be an actual agreement, the buyout agreement, but it has to include certain language that we tell them. The ordinance will tell you what it has to include. That language is going to include various things of, you know, you have a right to stay here. You don't have to leave your property unless you want to. If you leave, you can't come back, things of that nature. It will also have a provision that says rescission, that you have a right, even though you may sign this agreement, you have a right to walk away back out of the agreement. And that is a cool down period. That cool down period can vary from whatever you all decide. It can be a 20-day period, 30-day, 45. It could be whatever amount of days. I would suggest it not exceed 45 days because these kind of laws have been challenged in court, and the ones that have been successful were not in excess of 45 days. But anyways, the rescission period would allow a tenant to walk away. And I'm sure that's going to have a lot of discussion at the city council level as to what makes sense. Because sometimes a tenant might receive the buyout money, the $18,000 or the $20,000, spend some of that money, and then decide, I want to stay. It happens in the jurisdictions all the time. And so then you have to develop a mechanism to return that money back to the landlord. And some jurisdictions handle it differently. It's not an eviction issue, right? That's more of a breach of contract issue. It's not a breach of lease, it's a breach of an agreement. So it's not a just cause basis for eviction. But for the city council or anyone else who has that kind of concern on that side of the policy, we'll be challenging the board and the program to address those issues. So there's a lot here. I'm just saying that. And you know, it's likely going to go back and forth. But the more questions you ask, the better, because hopefully we have answers at the city council level to address those.
This isn't a question so much as just sort of a discussion point. And staff, please correct me if I'm just not thinking of things correctly. It seems to me, going back to the question about a minimum buyout amount, it seems to me like tying the minimum buyout amount to the pre-existing statutory fees for evictions not only makes sense, but is important to prevent situations where a landlord either intentionally or inadvertently is exploiting a tenant's lack of knowledge about their rights were they to go through the eviction process and what they would be entitled to. And also for preventing situations where a landlord in a bad apple, I think to use the earlier phrase, way is, essentially making life miserable, trying to incentivize voluntary move out rather than initiating the eviction themselves. So to me, that seems very rational. I'm surprised to see, I guess my first question is, am I thinking about this in a way that makes sense? Are we tracking? Because this is new to me.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So then I was surprised to see in the table looking at other jurisdictional policies that doesn't seem to be the norm. I think there was only one other jurisdiction that sets any minimum at all, which was Santa Monica. Oakland says nothing less than what's required by state or local law, but I don't know that there is state or local law that covers that, so.
Oakland does have a relocation ordinance, so I do believe that
Okay.
Oakland's would follow that,
So Oakland and Santa Monica both do that
Oakland and
too?
Santa Monica, yeah.
Okay. Like I said, not really a question, just sort of point of discussion. To me, that part of the high-level oversight policy makes a ton of sense. But I was surprised to see, you know, our proposed policy is in alignment on most factors with most of these other jurisdictions, and that was one that surprised me by standing it.
Back in 2018, when we did our initial research, there was only one jurisdiction, which was Oakland. And then between 2018 and today, Santa Monica revised their relocation ordinance to include minimum buyout amounts.
So I guess to the extent there's a trend, it's a trend in this direction, which is helpful.
Right. And I believe that, probably better for Charles to mention this, but I think some of this has been challenged in court, and the minimum buyout amounts, at least to my knowledge, have been upheld.
Great.
I don't know if that's the case.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. San Francisco's tenant buyout ordinance was challenged in court. It's pretty stringent in terms of how it regulates buyouts, and it was upheld by the Ninth Circuit. I don't believe San Francisco has a minimum buyout, though, so that portion wasn't challenged.
Yeah, not that's listed in the table, at least.
Right.
Which, for whoever prepared this, it's an extremely helpful table. Thank you.
Yeah, and noting that the amounts of what's required by Santa Monica, so the most recent jurisdiction to adopt a minimum payout for a buyout agreement, the minimum payout amounts are quite significantly higher than what's being recommended for Richmond. So in light of that, I would say that these minimum payouts seem to be quite moderate. I have another question unless you had more.
I actually have one to
Yeah, go for it.
piggyback on that.
Go for it.
Which you reminded me of earlier, which is, so you pointed us to the statute that lists what those minimum payouts are. I'm just wondering where those numbers come from, like what the statute is based on. If you know.
So, go ahead, Charles.
That was developed by the city. So our rent ordinance requires that when a landlord performs certain evictions, they pay a relocation amount. But the rent ordinance also says that relocation amount shall be set by city council. So city council, they may, I don't know if they did a fee study. This predates my time, but I'm assuming they did a fee study to develop those amounts. And they passed those amounts. I think those amounts were later adjusted downwards for owner move-in evictions. I think they were higher before, but some landlords came before the city council and described their experiences with having to pay the higher amount, described it as prohibitive for them to actually satisfy those amounts. So I believe that was decreased. And it's not within our jurisdiction, so that amount can go up and down without us knowing. Lastly, those amounts are adjusted by CPI each year as required.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. So hearing about thinking more about the rescission agreement, I can hear it here, the rescission deadlines. I am wondering if there's any standard of how long typically the relocation or the buyout agreements go into effect. So what I'm trying to get at is a situation that I could see coming up is that say the buyout agreement says you must vacate the apartment within 30 days, but the rescission period is 45. So after vacating the apartment, after paying a new security deposit, first month's rent, moving fees, all of that, then somebody says, I actually want to rescind my agreement. I'd like to move back into the apartment that or the unit that I was previously living in, and then would, sort of say like, well, I don't have the money that I was given before I have spent it. And so I'm wondering if there's any regulation on when the actual like tenant vacating the unit would go into effect. And if there isn't any regulation, if there's any sort of standard. So like, could they make an agreement that says you will move out tomorrow? Or, yeah, so that's my first question.
Sure. So because this is an ordinance and it's not written, the board and city council would have the ability to have language in there to address those concerns. So just off the top of my head, you might want to tie the vacating period to the rescission as a floor.
Yeah.
Or you can also, I think, I'm just not entirely sure because I haven't looked at San Francisco's, but they, in a while. But they may have some language in there that explains that if you vacate, you lose that rescission, right? So you can tie it to the, let's just say it's 30 days or 45, doesn't matter. You could say, whatever, the parties cannot agree to a vacating period prior to the expiration of the rescission date. However, if the tenant chooses to vacate prior to that date, then the rescission period is extinguished. That way, because perhaps the tenant wants to leave before the expiration of the rescission period, but because of the ordinance's language, they feel like, oh, I can't because I can't vacate until it's all, so you want to kind of create that. Point being, yeah, it's a good pickup and good catch by you, Vice Chair, and that's something that I think the attorneys, if approved by City Council, would address through the language.
Great. Yeah, I think that the latter option that you named of, a tenant vacating the unit would end the rescission period and giving that flexibility for if a tenant does wish to vacate sooner, that would that allows for kind of more flexibility and while still avoiding the situation that I named. And so personally, that sounds like a really solid option to me. And I think that having some of those things, maybe if possible, like discussing some of that ahead of time with the city's lawyers and having some of those options available to the council members. I could see that being a question that might come up for them. And I just want to confirm that the rescission period is only for the tenant to rescind their agreement. The landlord cannot rescind the agreement once it has been signed by both parties. Is that correct?
It's also a good question. It's whatever the board and the city council would like. You can make it both ways. You can give one party that right. I've personally never seen it from both like a unilateral rescission, but now it could exist. I know San Jose is unilateral. I don't know if the other cities are bilateral, but it's a possibility that the city council or the board would want both parties to have that right.
Yeah, I think so the concern that I have about the landlord being able to rescind the offer is that then a tenant could be put in the position of owing the landlord money through no action of their own. So if, the tenant signs an agreement on a new place, again, pays security deposit, first month's rent, and then the landlord says, actually, just kidding, I decided I don't want to pay you this money, I want you to stay, then the tenant would have already paid that money to a new unit, not be able to get it back, and then that could be a way to create financial difficulties for a tenant. And if there are, being attentive to ways that regulations like this could be used as tools for landlords who wish to harm their tenants. Again, knowing that the vast majority of landlords do not, but that they're, having heard of experiences of tenants with predatory landlords, want to make sure that that is not something that we're setting up. So I think that for me, what I would propose is either that the landlord can only rescind, that the rescission period for the landlord is much smaller, a matter of maybe a week or something, or that there's no rescission period for the landlord. Or that if the landlord does issue a rescission, that it wouldn't, something in there that they wouldn't be able to recover all of the money, that there wouldn't be an expectation that they would be able to recover all of the money that they had paid out to the tenant. Just something to avoid that particular circumstance.
Just echoing that totally, that making that right bilateral seems like opening a potentially very large can of worms to me.
And on the other side of that, we just had a case where the tenant really messed with the landlord. I think we need to put in something to protect the landlords from that same type of scam coming down. So.
Do you want to remind the board that the case that you're talking about?
This was where a tenant, the landlord had let this lady stay for free and a very small rent. Were you here for that case? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the landlord was really cool through the whole thing, and that the tenant pushed every button she could, until it came to the actual hearing, and she didn't bother showing up for the hearing because she knew that what she did, she didn't have a leg to stand on. And this landlord basically had to go through, he was crying in the audience, because he had spent so much time going through the process. So it works both ways, And I think it might be a good idea to have some kind of balance there.
I think that I don't know that I would personally agree with that characterization of the case that you described. But the difference for me here is that in a circumstance where a tenant would rescind the offer and not return all of the money, the landlord would have the ability to file a civil suit to reclaim that money. And so it is a danger, and there is definitely a danger of, if there, of predatory tenants, which again do exist, just like with landlords, the vast majority of tenants are wanting to engage in good faith. But if a landlord, if there is a rescission period that is the same on both, and a landlord rescinds the offer after a tenant has spent some of the money, whether they have vacated or not, that tenant wouldn't have the same rights to reclaim. Like, they would be, unless we put something in there kind of stipulating how the contract dispute would work, if they sign a contract saying that they will only accept the funds, that they can only use the funds for relocation associated with the agreement, and then the agreement is rescinded, that would then put them in a legal position of owing money that they no longer have and that they wouldn't have spent if not for the agreement existing in the first place. So I think that, like, I agree with you. I think that there needs to be some balance here, but I think that with the way that contract law works, the danger to the person receiving the money and then having a potential obligation to return all of that money is a higher legal danger than would happen to the landlord in this circumstance. And so that's why I think that it doesn't make sense to have a fully bilateral arrangement here, and that it makes sense to have a slightly different process for landlord and tenant in this circumstance, so as to ensure equity and fairness.
I agree with that as well. Certainly there can be predatory action on both sides. I'm not sure I see that applying in a 50-50 way to the rescission scenario specifically. But I will also, note for future discussion that our high-level oversight option has a 45-day rescission option, which looks like it's in keeping with the norm for peer jurisdictions, but 30 days also looks like it is in keeping with the norm. So, if that's a point of contention, it looks like there's potentially a reasonable compromise.
May I, Chair? Thank you. Just to perhaps help facilitate some of the conversation, because again, this is important. I'm sure the City Council will be asking similar questions, and you all can't speak during those meetings, and so it's good that you speak now about it. Board Member Heights' point about perhaps an unscrupulous tenant who's trying to gain the system. If there's a 45-day rescission period or any time, doesn't matter, and a tenant receives the money and says, no, I'm going to rescind, I'm not moving out, then the landlord has to go to civil court to pry the money back, right, get the money back. And that perhaps the landlord is not in the financial position to do that, or whatever barriers they might face. One way, and I think that's Board Member Heights' point, and one way to address that, if you're concerned about having like a bilateral rescission period, is to address that through when the payments need to be made. I don't know when that should be or how you would do that, but I suspect the closer the period the payment is made towards the expiration of the rescission period, perhaps the more you reduce the risk of a tenant receiving the money and then rescinding, right? So you might want to. It's up to you.
Do we know if if there are any jurisdictions, in our peer group that use like a sort of escrow option? Not escrow in the mortgage sense, obviously, but basically holding the money, neutrally. Obviously, that opens up other problems, like the tenant not being able to access the money for finding a next unit. I'm just wondering what the options might be.
I know that some jurisdictions have an escrow account for withdrawal from the rental market and owner move-in relocation payments, but I do not know if they have that same policy for buyouts. I can check. That's something we can look into, but I do know that it is common practice to have landlords pay into this escrow account that would be housed presumably at the rent program, and that account would hold the money until the buyout agreement is executed.
Yeah, so first of all, quickly responding to that idea of having an escrow account, an escrow period. One impact of having those funds held by the rent program would be that there would need to be significant staff oversight of the funds and greater accounting support within the program to make sure that those funds are held. And so one consequence of that would be an increase to the program budget and subsequently higher fees for landlords. So personally, I would prefer to, I guess what I would propose as an option would be some sort of deadline for, how long before the move out would take place that the funds would need to be paid, because I think that it is important that the funds not wait to be paid until after the person has vacated, because the majority of the expenses associated with relocation happen prior to actually vacating the unit. And that the landlord rescission period end with those funds being handed over. So somehow, like I think that there needs to be kind of a clear order of operations between, like, first the funds are handed over, or first there's a period where the landlord can rescind before the funds are handed over. Then the funds are handed over, and there is a period after that where first either party can rescind, and before the funds are handed over. Then the funds are handed over. There is a period where the tenant can choose to rescind, but would acknowledge responsibility for repaying the funds if they do choose to do that. And then then there would be a period where the tenant can no longer rescind, and then there would be the actual tenant move out. And if both parties agree to the tenant move out happening prior to, or if the tenant elects to move out prior to the end of the tenant rescission period, that tenant rescission period would end, that the tenant rescission period cannot extend beyond the time that they are actually residing in the unit. And then I think that the one thing that I would want to guard against, again, within that would be, like, how wanting to make sure that the buyout amount is paid to the tenant in a timely fashion, like, so that they have those funds when they need them to secure new housing, to use them for the purpose. But also not wanting to sort of mandate what that period, when the tenant would need to move out, like wanting to allow for some flexibility for the parties to come to an agreement to say, okay, we're planning this way in advance. We want to set this for 6 months from now. You agree you're going to move out? It might not make sense for the landlord to then pay out that amount immediately. But if they are both in agreement, yeah, we want this move out to happen in 2 weeks, like not having an artificial period where then the person, like, where like the landlord and tenant could come to a different agreement, but that the things are connected to each other so that it happens in the same order of operations, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that would be my proposal, rather than having the funds held in escrow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you were a tenant and you agree to this, though, if you're looking for a place, you need the dough right away. You need the money to not necessarily to move out, but you need the money to go down, find another place, and put everything. You need certain monies right away. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that's not possible. So I don't know how that would be addressed.
There are some circumstances, as Vice Chair Cantor mentioned, where the tenant wants to stay longer. They say, I want to stay for 4 months or 6 months because it's too difficult for me to move. I've got too much stuff. I can't move in a month. So I want the buyout agreement to be such that I have a 6-month period or something like that. So there are circumstances where, certainly the tenant's going to need money to spend on a new unit or a new place to live, but there are also circumstances where the tenant is more interested in having time than the money at that like their focus is, yes, I want the minimum buyout amount, but I really need more time because I have these various circumstances that prevent me from moving out.
What about if they said I need 6 months and then they don't pay rent for 6 months, they use that to move with, and then that would go against whatever the buyout was?
That's maybe a legal question. I don't know. I think that as long as it satisfies the total buyout amount, maybe, but maybe that's more for Charles to answer.
Yeah, I mean, so these are private agreements. Yes, we are regulating to a certain extent, but this isn't like a petition or anything of that nature. So the parties can agree to whatever they want to agree to, so long as they have certain language in there that we want them to have, which informs primarily the tenants of their rights to rescind and also the landlord of their rights as well. If, for instance, just as a policy suggestion, if you suggested allow the landlord, it's not really allowing, but it's a recognition that the landlord can use rent amounts to offset whatever buyout obligation they might have. They could certainly do that. The downside, I suppose, just off the top of my head, one of the downsides may be that if a tenant were to rescind and had already received those credits towards rent, those rents may be due immediately, 3 months or however many months, and that's a basis for eviction. Whereas if you don't have it connected to rent and it's just payments that you've received, monies, then that's not a basis for eviction, right? Failure to pay rent to just cause, but failure to pay me back money that was not rent is a civil, it's a civil suit, not an unlawful detainer. So that's just policy implications, which is, you're right, they can do that, but there's always various sides to it.
This raises an interesting point too, which is, like I said, I was surprised that by the number of jurisdictions in our chart that don't have a minimum payout, and this maybe identifies one reason why that is that it potentially actually takes away, assuming that both sides are negotiating in good faith, it removes bargaining power arguably from the tenant, who might wish to bargain for things like time rather than just the minimum payout. So that's a good point to have on the radar.
Yeah, thinking again through more kind of like edge case scenarios. So one scenario is that there is, again, in this scenario where they both agree to a far in the distance move out period. So let's say 6 months, and they agree that the transfer of funds will happen 1 month in. And then once that transfer of funds happens, if the tenant just stops paying rent, in that circumstance, would they, like, not as part of an agreement, but just as like, well, I've already signed this agreement, I'm already moving out, I'm just not going to pay rent anymore. Would that then, would the landlord then have the ability to do kind of a regular just cause eviction? And I guess I was going to ask if that would like kind of automatically void the relocation agreement, but on second thought, it seems like that's something that would, because these are private agreements, that's something that would need to be put into those private agreements. Like if it shifts from a relocation to an eviction, like if they don't obey the terms, then would that be something that would be sort of the landlord would need to include in the language of the contract that they write, or would that be something that would be governed by our ordinance?
The latter. So in that scenario, let's say a tenant agreed with the landlord to move out for this buyout, and they were going to do so in 3 months, and they received half of the money in month 1, and then month 2 they failed to pay rent. The landlord has a right under our ordinance to evict the tenant for failure to pay rent, and that eviction would terminate the tenancy. So you followed the 3-day notice, and when the tenancy is terminated, the landlord doesn't really, they wouldn't have to follow through just by operation of law with the buyout agreement, because there is no tenancy there by operation of law because it's been terminated, and they would have to unravel all that in court. They would have to seek the money they already paid through a different proceeding, not an unlawful detainer, but the owed rents they can seek through the UD process.
Great, thank you. That's helpful, because I think that again, to Jim's point about like not just thinking about potential predatory landlords, but predatory tenants, again, acknowledging that the vast majority on both sides are not that. I think like thinking that some of these edge cases are likely to come up both in the council discussion and in public comment. And so thinking through some of these things ahead of time, I think will set us up for success at council.
Just a quick comment. If there's going to be a thing where the landlord has to hand the tenant their rights and then the tenant signs it, I think there should be a mandatory meeting with the lawyer for the tenant so they can understand what's going down,
We don't have the authority to mandate that the tenant meets, but there could be language. I have to look at how San Francisco has done it, but for some reason I have to verify this, but I think there might be language in there that says the tenant has at least been offered time to review the agreement with either the rent board, the rent program, or with council. I'm pretty sure that's what part of the language includes that.
Yeah, I believe Berkeley's buyout policy has that requirement. So, yeah, I do. I know it does exist.
Any further questions from the board? Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers, if any.
No speakers on this item.
Is there a motion?
I will make a motion that we affirm the previously adopted option 3, and we direct staff to present the policy at a Richmond City Council study session in September 2025. The staff will work with the city attorney to draft an ordinance and return with the draft ordinance for city council approval anticipated October/November 2025.
Is there a second?
I second.
Madam Clerk, let's take a vote.
Okay. Yes, I have to pull up the recommended action. I'll take a vote. Board Member Espinoza,
Yes.
Board Member Height,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cantor,
Yes.
and Chair Tipton.
Yes.
Motion passes to direct staff to present policy at Richmond City Council study session in September 25, and work with the city attorney to draft ordinance and return with their draft ordinance for city council approval in October/November 2025. Motion passes unanimous. Next item is reports of officers.
There are no reports of officers today.
All right.
Meeting adjourned at 6:51 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.